Good morning, Chair Vollendroff, members Garrett and Holmes, staff and guests. The lobbies are open and the recording has begun.
Thank you, Deb. Great job. Welcome to the Board Caucus meeting for Tuesday, February 25th. We have a fairly full agenda today, so we will jump right into our agenda, starting with a legislative update from Mark. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Vollendroff and members Garrett and Holmes. Wanted to start today by mentioning the great appointment hearing that Chair Vollendroff had in the Senate Labor and Commerce Committee this past Friday. He was great, answered a lot of questions, including some tough ones from Senators Schessler and McEwen and others. We've set up some meetings with those members, and we'll kind of see what's on their mind. Friday was also policy cutoff, so it was something of a hectic morning with both of our policy committees meeting at the same time and passing what they could before the deadline. So some bills died, including the LCB Enforcement Priorities Bill that I think we talked about last week, as well as the ESOP bill, while others made it out. Those include House Bill 1940, the out-of-state investment bill with a tax preference for social equity, the Cannabis Retail Advertising Bill 5206 that we've talked about a lot over the past couple of years, and then the City of Seattle's Outdoor Service bill that we've talked a lot about this year, as well as this year's bill on home grow. Now, those last two, so the Outdoor Service Bill 1515 and the Home Grow Bill 1449, are really good examples of bills that look very, very different than the way they did when they were introduced. So 1515 now has a sunset date in 2026, and the provisions that had been just for the Seattle Center campus are now expanded to all of the World Cup fan zone cities, so bringing the total numbers of cities that would impact to 10. Meanwhile, home grow had been, had allowed people to grow up to 6 plants with local law enforcement in charge of essentially enforcing or policing the program. But the changes made on Friday would require people to use a traceability system created by the LCB, and then presumably LCB officers would be in charge of requiring people to maintain traceability. Those two bills are being heard in House Appropriations today. Another example of a bill that got a pretty radical reworking was Senate Bill 5403.
Mark, I have a quick question.
Yep,
Should I ask the question about a particular bill as we go along, or should just
go for it?
So just this traceability issue. Tell me, do we have a sense practically how that would, I mean, that doesn't even seem like a practical approach, and I'm just wondering about that.
We are struggling with that, and as we're going to talk about here in a minute. With the hearing coming up now, the fiscal note is going to be really important as we kind of provide some input to the legislature about implementation challenges like I think you're talking about. It's a very robust traceability system. I think the requirements in the bill right now. So I think we're trying to figure out what could make sense there. So that's one we're struggling with and dealing with a very tight turnaround. We would love to be able to provide that information to the legislature for the hearing, but that hearing is this afternoon at 1:30.
It just doesn't make any sense to me at all that we would be involved in traceability for private, and anyway, just
right. And
I would think that
go ahead, Ollie.
I would think the fiscal note should take care of it.
And it's possible that was the intent. The fiscal note is going to be sizable. Because it deals with things that even the traceability system for the industry doesn't have to deal with. There's a provision about requiring to document when product is shared. That's not something we ask retailers. So it's a pretty stringent requirement.
Yeah.
Is this 5206?
No, we're talking about the home grow bill, which is 1449.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Sure. So as I was saying, another bill that got a very radical reworking was Senate Bill 5403, which had been about allowing cannabis producer processors to do some direct sales to customers at their facility. That whole thing was stricken, and now the bill is about restricting management agreements and branding deals that supporters say give some retailers a financial interest in far more than 5 licenses, that 5 license cap in statute. This is something that I think all of you have heard about from folks in the industry. So again, a bill that was about one thing, now about something completely different. So all of these bills that we've just talked about need to pass a fiscal committee by 5 p.m. this Friday to stay alive. So this week is all about kind of clearing the decks and letting the fiscal committees do the work on passing or not. the bills before them. There are no policy committee meetings this week, and instead they're just marathon hearings and executive sessions in House Appropriations and Senate Ways and Means. And as you can imagine from the bills we've just discussed, those fiscal notes are going to be really important. And so our finance staff and folks in all of the divisions are really hard at work trying to turn those fiscal notes around. Again, like the ones we've talked about, where the first fiscal note we may have written on a bill is not going to be a good guide to the costs that we see once those bills have changed. Now, of course,
Mark,
not
what
yeah.
is the fiscal note on the 1515 and the sunset date again was
Yeah.
what?
So the sunset date is now the end of the year, calendar year, so December 31st, 2026.
Okay,
So
so was this what is kind of to get them through
The World Cup.
World Cup?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So the World Cup is
Okay,
in the
so
summer,
they're-
but just yeah.
So they're not trying to have this period go ongoing. It's just to get through the World Cup.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
And of course, I think they might say if it went well, they can revisit that. But yeah, right now the bill is just about getting through the World Cup, maybe an event or two afterwards.
Okay. Okay.
And again, I think that's trying to balance some of the concerns people have with expanded service. That's something we've talked about a lot over the past couple of years. House leadership has been very concerned about bills that expand alcohol service. Clearly, this bill does, but putting that sunset date on it might make it more palatable to those who do have some concerns in that area.
Right. So going back to 1449, what is it that they're trying to accomplish? What is it they're wanting to do?
Right. I think I think members have some concerns about home grow. There's some concerns that home grow would allow people to grow a significant amount of product. That 6 plants, if you have a sophisticated system, harvesting multiple times throughout the year, would be a lot of product. So I think trying to get traceability around it might be a way to allay some of those concerns.
I mean, but so what are they asking for to be able to grow more plants? What's prompting home grow and the plants?
So what's prompting home grow is that Washington is something of an outlier in that it doesn't have a provision to allow people to grow at home. When Washington was the first to legalize, along with Colorado allowed people to grow up to 99 plants at home, which was a lot, and they've since come down. But Washington has never had that provision to allow it. So supporters have been pushing this bill, and a bill like this has been introduced for each year far longer than I've been here. I don't know if Justin knows, but it's at least 7 or 8 years in a row.
So
And
we
it
have
hasn't
home
passed.
grow for medical patients, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
So this bill is trying to get home grow for anyone.
correct. That's right.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
So this bill is for home grow for anyone outside of the medical industry.
That's right.
Okay, that's what I was just trying to understand.
Mhm.
All
And
right.
Mark, do we know nationwide, like you mentioned, Colorado allows this? Like, are we an outlier? Do most states who have legalized adult use have some provision for home grow?
That is my sense. Yeah.
That's what I
that-
thought as well.
That most
And I
states
see
do.
Pete shaking your head. Pete, it sounds like you know something about that.
Yeah, we're definitely an outlier.
Okay.
And have we looked into how the other states are doing doing this? Is it a small amount allowed? How is
Yeah.
it being done? Pete,
Yeah,
do
I
you know?
think they vary, and I think that this might be, not to put the research team on the spot, but that'd be a great thing to do a kind of a scan across the nation and see who allows what. Because my sense is that it varies considerably from state to state.
I know I recently viewed a chart showing all of the limits state by state that allow home grow. And I'm sorry, Ollie, I can't remember. I think this wheel has already been invented, so we can. I'll see if I can find it.
What do you guys think about us asking our research team to do a little bit of work in this area for us?
Well, it might already be done. We just need
Okay.
to find the data.
Okay. Well,
and
Pete, why don't
really-
you bring us what you can, and then we can go from there.
And Canra may have some good resources on this as well.
Yeah.
You know, I think the more interesting question, I mean, it should be pretty easy to tally what the limits are state by state, but really, how does it impact enforcement? Because, you know, we know we want to make sure that we've got all of the commercial operations either licensed or we know about it. And I think that's been the biggest concern I've heard, and different states have had different approaches to it. So if we asked our research team with input from E&E, I think it would be great to just look at what are the issues surrounding, because it kind of helps us figure out what's the magic number. You know, if we
Yeah.
assume we want to go forward with it.
Yeah.
Right.
My guess is there's no state that is doing it through their state's traceability system.
Right.
So Mark, if something comes back to where we are reviewing it and saying this is doable, does it have to be a bill if it comes to that, or is this something the LCB can create?
My sense is that it probably does need to be a bill. This would be a pretty big
Okay.
change from the way, like, you know, the system envisioned in I-502. Again, like, correct me if I'm wrong, Member Holmes, but my sense is that it does need to be a bill.
Okay.
But that's another thing that we can kind of look at. Where are all those policy levers, or where are the rules that specifically prohibit it?
I
Correct.
see
Right.
Justin's raised his hand,
Yeah.
so he may have something to add to that.
Mhm.
Justin?
Yeah, good morning, Member Wallendroff, Garrett and Holmes. A little bit of background on this. So as Mark said, this has come up for a number of years,
Right.
probably 6 to 7 years, I would think. And the board has never taken a position of opposition on this. We did have some big fiscal notes at the beginning because there was undetermined on who would be doing the enforcement.
Right.
And so since everybody was kind of defaulting to the LCB, we created a note to represent that that would be the case. And so after that, there were iterations of the same bill, removing the onus of enforcement and oversight from the LCB. So our fiscal notes went away. And so I think even if we wanted, Mark is absolutely correct. We would need to have a legislative change to have that. That's not something that the board would be able to do by rule. But I think that and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but I believe, if I remember right, the local governments and WASPIC have definitely expressed concerns, if not opposed to this. And I think that's kind of where
That's
some
true.
of the barriers have been, not necessarily by the board. And so I just wanted to let folks know that we haven't actually traditionally been opposed to it. We're just trying to figure out what it would cost to implement it if we're involved in that. So other folks have opposed these legislative changes. And so that's just some additional background.
Thank you.
Member Holmes, you're going to say something?
Just very quickly, I agree with Justin to the extent that, you know, if the legislature doesn't define a limited amount of home grow as permitted under the law, then by definition, any law enforcement agency seeing a grow larger than that would have authority to you know, bring probably a felony charge. And so where I thought we could do some help is to maybe through a resolution or some guidance about how it might be implemented. But I think Justin's right, not because we would enforce it necessarily, but because any law enforcement agency could see that absent imprimatur of the legislature, that that's an illegal grow, doesn't have a license.
Mm-hmm.
Or a medical exemption.
Yeah.
I
Thank
think
you.
that's what Justin was saying. Yeah.
You know, just this is a little bit of an aside, but as we're having this conversation, it reminds me of something that's been on my mind that I just want to share with the two board members and have a placeholder for a future conversation. I was looking at our strategic plan as an organization and recognizing that it's very operational in nature, you know, responding to customers in a timely manner and, you know, various things that are really related to operations. At some point, I do wonder if it would be worthwhile for us as a board to have a conversation about where do we see ourselves in 5 years related to the industry that we regulate. And I think about things like home grow. I think about things like high THC concentration. I think about vape products, et cetera, and having a conversation amongst ourselves around a strategic plan related to the industries that we regulate. So I just throw that out there. At some point, I'd love to have more of a conversation about that. Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Yep. Okay, so our agency request bills are not going to the fiscal committee. So it's just a reminder that not every bill has to go through there or be worried about the fiscal cutoff this week. So our bills are in the rules committee, and that's the path that they'll take. Will and I met with Joyce Bruce, the governor's legislative director, yesterday, ostensibly about the social equity program, but just a good chance to kind of talk about the agency and build relationships. And we're looking forward to working with the incoming administration. So again, just to kind of sum up, we'll get some clarity on what's moving by the end of the week. I think a number of the bills that we're currently tracking may fall off, but even bills that haven't moved may not be truly dead. The social consumption bill from Representative Morgan, House Bill 1932, didn't pass out of policy committee, but supporters argue that because it could generate revenue, it might be declared necessary to implement the budget. I think it's near impossible to predict how much revenue it would generate. Our fiscal note was indeterminate on that, but that's just one to keep an eye on. And there are other bills that could be amended into a vehicle that's still alive. There's kind of an alternative to House Bill 1515 on outdoor service. That's House Bill 2013. It's never had a hearing, but you could see that it's about the same topic. It's outdoor service expansions don't go as far as they do in 1515. So again, could be seen as something of a compromise if 1515 runs into trouble. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have no further questions. Any further questions? Seeing none.
I just love your idea, Mr. Chair, about having some kind of I don't know, a retreat or whatever to discuss a vision going forward for the industry.
Great, thank you for that feedback, and I've made note of that, and will at some point bring that conversation back to us as a caucus topic. All right, thank you very much, Mark. Appreciate all
Thank
your
you.
work. Oh, and Mark, just let me know about meeting later today if we need to.
You got it. Will do.
Okay. All right, Daniel, I see that you have popped up on my screen here. So that indicates to me that we're moving to the policy and rules team for a number of updates, and you're up first with general updates, timelines, all industries.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Chair Volendroff, members Garrett and Holmes. So today or tomorrow's board meeting, we're going to have, firstly, I'll be presenting a response on a petition for rulemaking that we received on the social equity and cannabis program. Denise is going to be requesting approval of the CR 102 on implementing legislation regarding transfer of lab accreditation authority to the Department of Agriculture. And we're going to have two public hearings. The first public hearing is going to be on our minors on non-retail premises rulemaking. And the second public hearing is going to be on our cannabis waste rulemaking. Additionally, we currently have open for public comment, excuse me, the supplemental CR 102 that was followed on cannabis sample rulemaking. That public comment period is going to be open until the public hearing that's scheduled for March 12th at the next board meeting. Speaking of our next board meeting, for the next board meeting on March 12th, we have scheduled, as I just mentioned, the public hearing on cannabis sample rulemaking. And assuming that the public hearings tomorrow on minors on non-retail premises and the CR 103 and the cannabis waste rulemaking go forward, then at our March 12th board meeting, Jeff and Denise plan to file the CR 103 requesting final rules on those two rulemakings. I also just take this time to mention that I'm actually not going to be in attendance at the next two board meetings. I am in the next 2 weeks expecting the birth of what will hopefully be a healthy baby girl. So I will be taking a month off. Thank you, to spend time with her and my wife. So if I just disappear, that's why. So, and then additionally, we're going to be sending out or looking forward, we're looking at filing a CR 101 in the near future on a petition for rulemaking that we accepted back in December on adjusting required hours for certain liquor licensees to reflect seasonal restaurants. Those are sort of our licensees that are in the mountains or up in the islands that maybe don't want to operate the same hours all year round. We're hoping to get started on that rather soon, so that ideally we can have rules in place by the end of the summer, so that at least our folks that operate different hours during the winter will be able to change, will have rule changes in effect so that they can change their hours for the winter season. Additionally, we'll be sending out an invitation later this week on the retail alcohol product placement rulemaking. We're going to be hosting 2 stakeholder engagement sessions. Those are going to be held on Monday, March 10th from 10 a.m. to noon, and on Thursday, March 13th from 1 to 3 p.m. We're going to be posting draft rule language in the next day or so and sending that invitation out via Gov Delivery. And I'll give another plug for that tomorrow. As I just mentioned, I'm not going to be leading those sections because I will be indisposed in the happiest and most joyful of ways. But Director Nordhorn is going to be leading those sessions, and I'm sure he's going to do a bang-up job. I know that was a lot, so I can pause here and just see if there are any questions before I just jump right into previewing the petition.
Well, before I jump into my comment or question, I want to again say congratulations to you and your wife.
Thank you.
That's amazing. And yeah, congratulations. So in terms of the community engagement sessions that are coming up relating to product placement, this is to my fellow board members. This is an area that I'm really interested in. And so I just wanted to, I want to participate in one of those sessions. And obviously I can't participate. We can't participate at the same time. So I just wanted to let you guys know that on March 10th, I'm planning on joining that session. If either of you are interested, I will step back from that. But otherwise, I would like to participate in that. I'm just letting you know so we don't awkwardly show up and then one of us have to leave. And then the March 13th one is open. So if anybody wanted to participate in that. So just wanted to put that out there for both of you to be aware of. Okay, Daniel, anything else before we move, or any other questions for Daniel? Doesn't look like it. Daniel, anything else before we move on to the next? Okay, I think we're ready to move on to your next agenda item, social equity and cannabis.
Sure. So good morning again. I'm going to preview the petition for rulemaking. I'll be presenting a recommendation on during tomorrow's board meeting. The director's office is recommending denying this petition for rulemaking because our rulemaking on the social equity and cannabis program has only recently concluded, and there were multiple different opportunities throughout the past year for providing feedback. On January 10th, the LCB received a petition from Mark Elkins on behalf of Elkegard Enterprises requesting to change the social equity and cannabis rule at WAC 314-55-570. Specifically, he requested to prohibit current licensees from having any percentage of ownership interest in social equity licenses. He additionally requested other amendments to the rule, such as prohibiting license mobility and placing additional restrictions on the transfer of social equity licenses. As I just stated, and as I'll go into more detail on tomorrow, the social equity and cannabis rulemaking process happened for all of last year, and there were multiple opportunities for stakeholders and the public to provide feedback. Multiple individuals did submit petitions for rulemaking during the rulemaking process, and the board, in fact, accepted a large number of them. And those petitions for rulemaking ended up influencing and in some instances affecting the eventual rule language we came up with. Unfortunately, this person missed the deadline. It's not in the LCB's or the public interest to reopen this particular rulemaking right after it concluded. And I would also argue that in general, we shouldn't make it a practice to reopen a rulemaking right after we finished it. As such, as I said, the director's office will be recommending during tomorrow's board meeting to deny the petition for rulemaking. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
No, that makes sense to me. I completely agree given the timeline and yeah, so.
I agree.
All right. Any thing else, Daniel, on that?
No, that's it for me. I think I can hand it off to the next rules coordinator.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Denise. I see you on the screen here, Denise. So you are free to give us an update on the cannabis lab accreditation.
Okay. Good morning, Board Chair Vollendroff and Board Members Garrett and Holmes. I'm here to preview the CR 102 with draft rule language to amend and repeal sections of Chapter 31455 WAC related to the transfer of cannabis laboratory quality standards and accreditation from the LCB to the Washington State Department of Agriculture. The Director's Office will be asking you to approve the CR 102 at tomorrow's board meeting. This rulemaking is related to implementing essentially three pieces of legislation. House Bill 1859, which passed in 2022, that was jointly requested by LCB and the Department of Agriculture, amended RCW 6950-348, and among other things, reassigned the responsibility for developing cannabis laboratory quality standards from LCB to Department of Agriculture. Laboratory quality standards include the methods and protocols cannabis testing laboratories must use. Department of Agriculture adopted rules to implement House Bill 1859 on April 17, 2024, under their new Chapter 16309 WAC. Second substitute House Bill 2151, which passed in 2024, amended RCW 6950-348 and transferred the authority for cannabis laboratory accreditation to Department of Agriculture. Under House Bill 2052, which had passed in 2019, authority for laboratory accreditation had originally been transferred from LCB to the Department of Ecology. However, second substitute House Bill 2151 reassigned this authority to Department of Agriculture last year. Laboratory accreditation assures that laboratories are following laboratory standards to achieve consistent and accurate results. Department of Agriculture adopted rules for laboratory accreditation requirements that became effective July 1, 2024 under Chapter 16310 WAC. Under RCW 6950-348, cannabis testing laboratories must obtain and maintain accreditation under Department of Agriculture, and LCB will continue to certify labs. The proposed rules clarify the requirement that laboratories must be accredited by Department of Agriculture in order to be certified by LCB. LCB also continues to have authority for setting quality assurance and product standards under RCW 6950-342 and enforcing these product standards, as well as enforcing other requirements, including the reporting of test results to LCB, traceability, and laboratory disposal of cannabis waste. We filed the CR 101 to initiate this rulemaking on July 17, 2024. We held 2 stakeholder feedback sessions in February 2025, where we presented and discussed draft rule language. We received 4 sets of comments after the stakeholder session, some of which were integrated into the proposed rules we are filing with the CR 102. The main rule changes include the following: repealing 2 WAC sections, WAC 314.55.1025 and 314.55.103, because the activities under these 2 sections have transferred to Department of Agriculture, and amending 4 WAC sections, 314.55.0995, 102, 1035, and 109, to remove references to accreditation and accreditation activities under LCB, to add references to Department of Agriculture's new rules, and to align terminology and other language with Department of Agriculture rules. Additional changes include to consolidate and clarify LCB laboratory certification requirements under WAC 314.55.0995 and associated penalties, as well as some changes throughout these 4 sections for consistency and to align with other rulemaking. I'll go into more detail tomorrow about the changes, additional changes. If approved, the CR 102 would be filed and the public comment period would be open until the hearing scheduled for April 9th board meeting. If we don't need to make any substantive changes based on comments we receive, we could bring the CR 103 with final rule language to the board for approval at the April 23rd board meeting at the earliest. If the board approves the CR 103 with final rule language on April 23rd, the rules would go into effect on May 24th, 2025. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Denise. Any questions? Seeing no questions, thank you very much. All right, let's see. Denise, you're up again. So we're going to hear from you now on minors on non-retail cannabis licensed premises.
Yes. Let me just get my script back up here. Good morning again, Chair Vollendroff and members Garrett and Holmes. I'm here to preview the public hearing scheduled for tomorrow's board meeting on rulemaking to allow minors on non-retail cannabis premises of producers and processors. After the public hearing, if we don't make any substantive changes to the rules, we would ask for the board's approval of the CR 103 with final rules at our next board meeting on March 12th. This rulemaking consists of proposed changes to WAC 314.55.015, which requires that applicants, licensees, and employees working in licensed establishments be at least 21 years of age. RCW 6950-357 explicitly prohibits persons under 21 to enter or remain on the premises of a retail outlet, with some exceptions for medical patients. Statute does not specifically prohibit minors on the licensed premises of producers and processors. This rulemaking is the result of 2 petitions accepted in 2022. One of these petitions sought to make permanent a COVID allowance the LCB had in place until the end of 2022 that allowed children and grandchildren of licensees to be present on the licensed premises of producers and processors under certain conditions. The CR 102 with proposed rules was filed on January 15th of this year. The proposed rules allow 2 groups of minors on the licensed premises of producers and processors under certain conditions. The first group are children and grandchildren of licensees who are under 16, and the second group is employees of licensed and registered contractors between the ages of 18 and 20 conducting work on premises. The conditions in the proposed rules for children and grandchildren of licensees include some of the same language from the COVID allowance, specifically that they not possess any products associated with the production, processing, or sales of cannabis. Additional conditions in the proposed rules include that they not enter or remain where cannabis is present, that they are under the direct supervision of the licensee while on the premises, and that the licensee notify the LCB prior to children being present, including providing information about the ages of the children, number of children, and when they may be present. Receiving this notification is a way for our enforcement staff to know in advance if children might be on premises, and also gives us a way to evaluate the number of licensees who might be using this particular feature. Employees of contractors under 21 are allowed in the proposed rules if these employees are at least 18. They are employed by a contractor licensed or registered with the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries, are only on the licensed premises during the course of their employment, are accompanied by a supervisor from their own company who's at least 21, and that they indicate in the visitor log if they are under 21 and the name of their business. Proposed rules also identifies penalties. As you are probably aware, we have received many comments throughout the rulemaking process, including during the board meeting, when the CR 102 was accepted last time, and then also this week leading up to the hearing that I believe comments have been forwarded to you. Because of the nature of the public hearing, I'm not able to answer any questions that may come up during the hearing itself tomorrow, but I may be able to answer questions after the hearing has concluded. But right now, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Okay, any questions from board members? I have a couple
Yeah,
of questions, but
this-
want to go
I-
ahead. Board.
Okay, one of the things that I had discussed, and I thought Daniel might have discussed it with you because I did it with my one-on-one with him, and then asked him to discuss it with the other two board members, was the piece about them having to notify us. And in what we're hearing, that that we can agree upon that in advance of the hearing, that they don't have to notify us. And the difference being with enforcement is it wasn't allowed, but now that it's allowed, enforcement shouldn't be shocked when they walk in and see minors and things. But I had that discussion in detail with Daniel, and he was supposed to be sharing that with you. Did that not occur?
Yeah, I spoke with Daniel about that. I don't know if Daniel, if you wanted to interject, but since we've filed the 102 and we have the hearing tomorrow, I think any changes that we might look at around rulemaking, we would discuss after the public hearing portion. But Daniel, if you want to.
And that he brought that up, and what I said to him, if we know we're going to do that, and we know that the majority of the public, what we were hearing from the community is on that issue, what's wrong with being proactive instead of reactive, of saying to the community, we heard you on this particular issue, and that's already being under consideration, rather than having people line up for a public hearing to speak on something that we're already saying we're going to address.
Yeah, so I think, and I apologize if I wasn't clear. This may be this may have been a failure on my part to sort of adequately do the telephone sort of relaying. I think where our concern comes in is just that, yes, that a lot of the comments we've gotten so far have expressed concern about the notification requirement.
Mm-hmm.
However, we also want to, and historically, because the public hearing tomorrow has to occur based on the proposed rule language as filed in the 102, we considered potentially looking at announcing that we are going to remove the notification requirement, but after discussing it further internally, we want to make sure that we give folks an opportunity at the public hearing tomorrow to speak their piece. And because we also don't know that it's entirely possible that tomorrow there are folks that come and testify at the public hearing and say, no, the notification requirement is important. We don't want to discourage other folks from speaking their piece at tomorrow's public hearing. And then again, because we're required to respond to the testimony we get in the public hearing and to the public comments that we receive, we want to make sure that we're being entirely thorough and fair to all parties in this process. That while yes, we've acknowledged that the majority of folks who commented have expressed concern about the notification requirement,
Daniel, I would have never suggested or recommended that if I didn't know that we have not done that in the past on things that we know from hearing from people that we were going to change. So I brought it up because I know it has been done before when we know that the majority of people are showing up, would show up for something that we've already looked at as a board and said that we are okay with taking that out.
Sure.
And
And I
I was just going to inject something, and that is, and Daniel, just thinking about your comment about, other perspectives, because it could go either way. So we change it and we take that provision out. Somebody else could come and give us a different perspective, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't. Because I agree with Board Member Garrett. I mean, one of my questions was, what have we actually changed in the language based on feedback that we've heard all along? These are
Right.
not new feedback that we've heard. I've heard this particular issue from the very beginning, and it had, before Board Member Garrett started talking, Denise, one of the questions I was going to have is, can you walk through what we've actually changed? Because I don't see a lot that we've actually changed in regards to the feedback that we've gotten so far. So, and maybe I'm missing some of that.
Sure. So I can just speak to, for instance, and not to speak for Janice, but for instance, we got stakeholder feedback earlier on that had there was a survey that went out. I think Denise was going to go over this tomorrow in her presentation, but there's a survey that went out in November with draft rule language, and our initial draft rule language there limited this to only indoor grow operations and excluded outdoor grow operations. But the feedback we got from folks was, why don't you expand it to outdoor grow operations? And after that feedback, and Denise can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding was after the big stakeholder feedback, we decided to include outdoor grows. I think additionally, I mean, again, while some of the feedback has been concerned about the notification requirement. For example, we just got a comment in this morning that suggested not to remove the notification requirement entirely, but to give it less detail. For instance, because currently the notification requirement says we want to know how many kids are there, the days they're going to be there, and the times. And the proposed comment said, do you really need all that information? Just say, hey, just leave it as a notification requirement so that folks have to notify the LCB that there will be children present there, but they don't need to know necessarily the ages, the dates, and the times. And so that's a more middle ground approach that I also think that we don't necessarily want to rule out before, in theory, allowing that person to testify at the public hearing tomorrow. It's possible that if that middle ground approach comes in, and I think that's something that we could consider. And I think also that Denise made the point that we haven't ever really gotten a good idea of how many people used this during the pandemic. One advantage of simply just having a bare bones notice requirement is that we could see how many licensees are using this. If in the first year we see a vast majority of our producer processors are flooding us with notifications on it, we can revisit and say, hey, is this really necessary? Versus on the flip side, if we only get 3 or 4 licensees that actually notify us, we can similarly say, hey, is this really necessary to keep this?
Yeah.
Daniel, but it's going in a circle on what I was saying. So if we as a board has agreed that that's not necessary, which is the conversation that I had, and I think I said to have it with the other 2 board members, that is not necessary. And the majority of what we were hearing on this particular issue was that being proactive, it's not going to stop somebody from, it might not even stop the people that are saying they feel like it shouldn't be there, but it changed the whole mindset. A person might come and say, I'm glad you guys listened and heard me, and you all are doing something about it. So it can go 2 ways. And the example you gave of what you just received this morning, even with that person, it could be that they're trying to come up with a compromise because we have it there, rather than it wouldn't even have been necessary for them to say anything if it's not there. So I look at it different, of being more listening to the community, being more proactive on hearing them and saying, we heard you, and to change what they're coming to say, rather than coming to be against something, coming to say, thank you for LCB for listening to me and have heard me. So that's where I am on that particular subject. But I had a couple of more questions on this, because I also see where we're seeing under age 16, and then we had provisions for 18 to 20. What about 16 and 17? What are we seeing there?
Mhm.
Of
I'm seeing
that,
I'm seeing a absent of, we're saying 16 and under, and then the other thing was for 18 to 20. So when the child or kid, if they're 16 or 17, what does that mean?
so that we have the age 16 in there because that's what was in the COVID allowance. And I believe that the COVID allowance was around that their child would be able to drive at age 16. So it was really trying to accommodate childcare and school closures, and then account for children who wouldn't be able to transport themselves. So that just mirrors the COVID language for the kids.
So
The
it was
employee,
intentional to not do anything for 16 and 17-year-olds because they can drive?
that's that's my understanding of what the COVID allowance was based on, and so that portion was based on the COVID allowance. The 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, that's related to workers.
Right.
And there's different
Right.
requirements for workers under the age of 18. So this would be workers with contractors who were 18, 19, and 20.
Okay, so there isn't a void there?
They're different populations.
They're
Ones are
different groups.
kids
Yeah.
and
Okay.
licensees, and the other ones are workers. And that
Okay.
age cutoff.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That explains that. But no, those are my two things. I would like to hear what the other two board members have to say about it.
Yeah, thank you, Board Member Garrett, and thank you, Denise. Before we get there, I'm going to give Member Holmes an opportunity. I see your hands up, and then we'll have more conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add an observation in light of, how we're approaching public comments and all of that, that I have read all of the written comments. I found them very persuasive, particularly the one received today that interlineated the proposed rule. And so I'm really glad about this conversation. And I do hope, as Member Garrett is pointing out, that we'll have something different to propose that reflects the comments we've received. But I just
Right.
without saying that the public comment is less important or anything, I just want to stress, so it seems like a great opportunity to observe how well and how persuasive the written comments were, because they certainly registered with me. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. I agree. I think that the written comments were extremely helpful, and I took the time to read every single one of them. I have to say that I find being more proactive than reactive is the better strategy, and that applies not just to our own rulemaking, but it applies to the legislature. It applies to many different things. And so I agree with Board Member Garrett. To the degree that we can, being more proactive is the appropriate thing to do. And the comments that we received just this morning, the compromise proposal, I was something that stood out to me as a potential solution. So Justin, I see you've joined us. Do you want to have, seems like you want to join in the conversation?
Yeah, I wanted to give a little bit of background, and then also kind of the thought process on where we came to at this point. So just to speak on the COVID allowance, because that's something that I actually drafted, so I'm very familiar with those provisions. And it was to accommodate those folks, particularly in rural areas where there was no bus service, there was no daycare available. And so the cutoff for 16 was having to do with who is likely to be an independent underage person who could drive and get to places and those types of things versus somebody who's really reliant on the parent. And so that's why we made those particular types of accommodations. There's been a lot of concern at the time of COVID expressed, and even recently from public health and prevention community members on having the accessibility piece. And we understand, there are both sides of this coin, but of course, those are some of the feedback pieces that we are getting as well. To address the notification piece, I had a conversation with the team on that particular provision, and one of the things that comes to mind, and if we want to move away from that, that's certainly a avenue that we could take. But as one of the things that we've been seeing over the last year or two is a lot of how many people use these types of privileges, not just for this, but in other license types, and we don't have an answer for that because we don't track any data. And so part of the interest on the reporting is just understanding how many people are actually utilizing this privilege and who's not. That was one of the reasons. As far as the components around changes between when the CR 102 was filed and the public hearing. So the formal public comment period happens after the CR 102 has been filed. So we made changes before the CR 102 is filed on draft language from the iterations of the first drafts. And then we collect all the comments up until and including the public hearing. And so if we were to make changes formally around these, my understanding is that we would have to redraft the CR 102 and start that process over, because the folks who are going to be preparing to come and testify at the public hearing are testifying on what was presented in the CR 102. So if we have an interest, most of the times, those types of changes, if we don't deviate from the CR 102, would happen post-public hearing. And then if it's an incidental change or non-substantive change, then we could make those changes and move into the CR 103. If it's a substantive change, then we need to do a supplemental CR 102. So either we would have to redraft the CR 102 prior to the public hearing to make these changes, or we would make the changes post-public hearing and incorporate other changes that we make. And if we're making these changes, so let's say that that's the direction that we're going. If we make these changes right now, then we would have to refile another 102, and we'd start the formal public comment period over again. And then if we make more changes after the public hearing, we're going to have to do another type of supplemental CR 102 unless there's no substantive changes. So I think that the most efficient course of action is to collect as much public comment as we can up until the public hearing, and then facilitate changes post-public hearing that we all find is beneficial to the stakeholders that are making these comments. So that's kind of where that process usually lies. So it's not that we can't, but I think we do need to refile that 102 to make sure that it's transparent what's changed, so people have an opportunity to prepare, because we have to have a minimum of 30 days of formal public comment period between the 102 and the public hearing, and that's driven by regulations that oversee the administrative procedures.
Okay, thank you, Justin. I see Ollie, go ahead, and then Pete.
So Justin, two things there. First of all, we're not saying that make the changes before. We're saying to the community, we heard you, and we will have the board has agreed to make those changes. That's two different things. The second thing, if you've heard from all three board members that they are in agreement and want to do this, and a decision was made to not do that, it was not communicated back to the board, and us now hearing it being announced today like it has never been discussed.
No, I don't think that that's the case, because nobody's making a decision not to do something. It's just trying to let that formal public comment period play out. And so trying not to bring something into that wasn't necessarily there. We understand, obviously, talking to the board today too, it's evident that you'd like to see this change. We could certainly forecast that in the briefing of the public hearing.
And that was all I asked for.
Yeah,
and we all I asked for.
Yeah, and we could certainly do that. The way that I was understanding it is that the board may have wanted a change in the language beforehand to show that proactiveness, which that would trigger us to do a different type of process. And so if we want to just forecast that the board is open to this change, we can certainly introduce that into the briefing comments of the public hearing before people start to comment. And then after the public hearing, obviously, we'll come back and make any changes. And if we find that there's substantive changes, we'll have to file a a supplemental CR 102 to facilitate those particular changes. So I hope that makes sense. And we're not saying
Well,
that, we're trying to
like I
make a
said,
decision.
that was all I asked for from the very beginning, and that was all I asked for Daniel to share with the other two board members and with Denise to say. It wouldn't have led into all of this other discussion. That was all I was saying. And one of the things that I put emphasis on, and which I would discuss with Daniel, and which all both board members, is any area that we can find a way to be proactive when we are hearing something and not have to wait for to be told or for the community to say we are against this, on and on and on. If we have areas that we can be more proactive in letting the community know we heard you, we should welcome that, and our staff should welcome that.
Yep. All right, I'm going to move us on just because of time, but thank you, Board Member Garrett, for that. And I support that and want to make sure that we are being more proactive. And Justin, I appreciate your suggestion about tomorrow, signaling that we're open for that. And then maybe we can have discussions, Justin, just in terms of future conversations about how to make sure that we are being a little bit more proactive and not finding ourselves in this kind of situation in the future. But I also want to acknowledge the work of the two, of not just the two, but the rules team. And, this is not necessarily a criticism as much as direction that we are giving from the board. So I appreciate you listening to us. Okay, Pete, I'm going to go ahead and you're up next.
Just very quickly, I'm a little bit concerned about what Justin feels may be required under the Administrative Procedure Act. If at worst it's just a 30-day extension, then I suppose that's not that big a deal. But it just does beg the question that, if we can't change a rule based on public comment, then why do we have public comment? I just kind of was a little bit concerned that it's probably not as dire as I may have heard, or maybe I mistakenly heard it. It seems like we can move pretty quickly on the rule that all three board members would like to see when we take it up tomorrow.
Yeah, it's not that we
all.
can't make, it's not that we can't make a change based on public comment. It's the way that the timing of a change is and what's required to be able to provide notice to stakeholders of these types of changes, and then to provide that formal opportunity again to be able to have additional public comment on that. So that's all I was saying. But we definitely want to be responsive to those stakeholder interest points.
And if necessary, we could ask our AG consult on that. But I just wasn't aware that, a change based on public comment would restart the public comment period. That shouldn't be the case. But I'm not an expert on the APA.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate the conversation. All right, we're going to move. Denise, are you done? I'm sorry. Did you have more that you needed to say, or are you done?
I'm done.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to move right to our last agenda item, which is Jeff giving us an update regarding the sale of cannabis waste.
Good morning, Chair Vollendroff and board members Garrett and Holmes. This morning, I will briefly preview the public hearing schedule for tomorrow on the proposed rule amendments to implement substitute Senate Bill 5376. SSB 5376 is the bill which passed the legislature in 2024 regarding the selling of cannabis plant waste material containing 0.3% THC or less, such as cannabis plant roots, and it amends WAC 314 59097. We filed the CR 101 for this rulemaking in May and held a stakeholder meeting in September. So if the public hearing goes tomorrow as expected, I will be presenting the CR 103 on this rulemaking for approval during the next board meeting on March 12th, which, if approved, would have the updated rule language in effect on April 13th. I will go into more detail tomorrow before the public hearing, explaining the specific changes that the proposed rules would make to implement SSB 5376. Some of the changes include creating a definition of what sellable cannabis waste is, and other changes to the rule include defining sales between cannabis licensees and from cannabis licensees to members of the public who are not cannabis licensees. So thank you, and I am happy to answer any questions.
I have no questions. Any questions? All right, seeing no questions, this one here is a little easier, or we're getting less feedback on this particular one, so appreciate it. All right, that concludes our agenda. Any board member or executive assistant reports today? Deb, Gretchen? I can
No,
see my
no.
fellow board members shaking their
Thank
head, but
you.
I can't see you guys.
No, thank you. We're good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, that concludes our meeting for today. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll adjourn. Bye, everybody.
What's going on?